Hi, welcome to Superhero Rundown. I'm Crimson, and today we're talking about Brendan Fraser, internet darling, great action hero of the 90s and early 2000s, and of course, bicon of the millennium. So I'm going to state for the record that this movie was responsible for my LGBTQ plus journey. I mean, just look at this amazing cast. Oded Fehr, Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, Arnold Vosloo, Patricia Velasquez, and like the entire rest of the cast. So let's talk about The Mummy with Brendan Fraser and why it's good. Spoiler, this episode is just me fan-personing for about 10 minutes. Fair warning. What's so great about this movie? Well, they made one in 1932, which I covered in my Fool's Gold series, which you can see on Patreon as a patron. Anyway, George A. Romero had made a film treatment sometime in the 80s. It was basically about a woman named Helen who discovers Imhotep, a general of Ramses II, and accidentally wakes him up with an MRI. That's not how MRIs work? I don't know, maybe they do? They use magnets and nobody knows how those even work. Anyway, development hell happened for a bit and Stephen Sommers was attached to the film. He wanted to make a romantic action adventure with a faster and scarier mummy. And it worked because he spent a year writing the screenplay. Sommers cast Fraser because he felt that Fraser fit the swashbuckling Errol Flynn type he was looking for. Okay, now that we set up the films, let's look at the cool things that the film actually does. The very first thing the film does is establish the story. Imhotep's backstory of being the pharaoh's high priest who was naughty with the pharaoh's mistress. Then it flashes to 1923 and we meet Evelyn, a librarian who dreams of adventure and finds out that Rick O'Connell, played by Brendan Fraser, has been to Hamunaptra, the place where Imhotep is buried. The romance. It's organic. Rick and Evie are not really into each other to start, but they develop a relationship. First as colleagues, then as friends, then as romantic interests. But it's not fast either. You can tell that time has passed in establishing the relationship. Also this. The fact that Brendan Fraser just screams in a mummy's face is hilarious. The named characters all have a purpose. The Americans are regeneration fodder for Imhotep, Benny serves the bad guy, Evie's boss hangs out with Oded Fehr, and even Winston gets them back to Hamunaptra at the cost of his life. In Heroes, Mummies, and Treasure, Near Eastern Archaeology in the Movies by Kevin McGeough, we learned that the public perception of gender roles in archaeology is also influenced by fictional films, issues that have been well addressed by feminist and gender theory. Messages about gender have real ramifications for archaeologists and the way they negotiate their public roles. Gender roles that are presented or reified by film can be particularly burdensome, if not limiting. For male characters, issues of gender are tied up with ethnicity, not unlike detective or spy stories. British archaeologists, if heroic, are heroic because of their intellect and sophistication. American male archaeologists tend to be serious, adventurous, roguish individuals with a penchant for drinking. British archaeologists tend to think through problems, whereas the Americans fight their way through problems. The plot is actually solid too. Evie raises a mummy. They try to protect the Americans from being sucked dry. They figure out where the gold book is, get it, stop the mummy, and Rick and Evie ride off into the sunset with all the bad guys dead and a bunch of fucking gold. Apparently, all the answers to life's questions are dynamite, at least according to Rick O'Connell. In The Mummy created its own genre that many tried and failed to replicate, Nadia Reckman explains, there are plenty of action movies out there, and there's no shortage of comedy, horror, or even adventure ones, even though the true adventure films are pretty hard to come by these days. But 1999, The Mummy did something that was never done before and blended these genres, creating a unique, heartwarming, and thrilling roller coaster of a ride, and characters that forever captured the audience's hearts. Elizabeth Flux in The Mummy, Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz's adventurous romp Catches Lightning in an Urn, explains further. It's tightly written, perfectly cast, and as they walk the difficult line between horror and goofy comedy, somehow everyone is tonally on the same page. Never is the rare collision of good luck and skill in The Mummy more apparent than when you encounter the abject failure of the third film in the franchise, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Is it a perfect movie? To me, yes. It's a great movie. Good story, fun characters, great music, a sense of adventure, romance, fighting bad guys. Americans? But let's look at the next movie, which may not be looked at with a fondness, but it's centered around the women, so fuck you, it's great. The Mummy Returns starts with The Rock making a pact with Anubis and getting an army of undead furries. Like you do. But time has passed for Evie and Rick, who now have an 8-year-old idiot of a child, Alex. Evie is now a renowned Egyptologist, probably because of all the gold they had at the end of the first movie, and the fact that she and Rick saved the world. This movie is about the romance between Evie and Rick. In The Mummy Returns isn't afraid of romance, and that's what makes it great. Katy Burt tells us, in The Mummy, it's not that Evie is never a damsel in distress. It's that Rick sometimes is also a damsel in distress. Evie literally saves Rick from a Cairo prison upon their first meeting. In The Mummy Returns, their distress is focused around the active threat to their son. In this, they are both flawed parents, and the movie doesn't really care, by which I mean it doesn't judge them for it. And there's a great deal of fun in that, especially for Evie's character, who would likely be figuratively massacred in another movie for failing as a mom. They find a bracelet belonging to the Scorpion King after Evie knows exactly where they're going in the tomb. You guys are bad at reading. First the book, now the chest containing the bracelet of Anubis. Anyway, here we are at Hamunaptra looking for fucking Imhotep yet again, who apparently now has a cult surrounding him thanks to the first movie. Evie's been having dreams about ancient Egypt because she's Princess Nefertiti or something. Anck-su-namun resurrects Imhotep because she's the other main character in the story. The bad guys kidnap Alex, and now there are higher stakes than the first movie. Not only is it to fulfill Evie and Anck-su-namun's destinies, but also to rescue the stupid kid who put an ancient bracelet on his wrist with no thought of consequences. What can I say but oops? After they rescue Alex, Anck-su-namun kills Evie. Alex says, fuck it, let's resurrect my mom, while Dad goes to Imhotep to kill him for killing his wife. Alex resurrects Evie with a great callback to the stork hieroglyph from the first movie. Evie and Anck-su-namun face off against each other just as the terrible CGI rock comes to confront Rick and Imhotep. Rick sends the rock to hell, but now the fucking oasis is falling apart, so it's time to go. But Rick and Imhotep are stuck trying to get out from the underworld. Rick begs Evie to save herself, but she risks her life to save him. True love. Imhotep watches Rick be saved by Evie, but is betrayed by Anck-su-namun and chooses death. You almost feel bad for the poor bastard. But you know what? The Mummy Returns did something no one else did around that time. Niall tells us in the Mummy franchise did Hollywood's latest action movie trend 20 years early that action blockbusters are finally allowing female characters to take center stage. But the Mummy franchise already tackled this trend 20 years ago. Marvel is only now emphasizing its female superheroes, such as with the long-delayed Black Widow. Meanwhile, Jungle Cruise stars Emily Blunt as a World War I-era action hero who can throw a punch as good as The Rock. But 1999's The Mummy and its 2001 sequel, The Mummy Returns, paved the way for female-driven stories before everyone else. Yeah, that's why The Mummy Returns is good. It follows the women, and it's the logical progression given how we followed the men in the first film. Gray even draws a parallel to Jungle Cruise. One major misstep of recent blockbusters is making the female hero too perfect to be relatable. Jungle Cruise's Lily Houghton rarely shows vulnerability and only has one flaw, her inability to swim, which is quickly overcome. In contrast, the Mummy franchise allows Evie to make mistakes and accept help without sacrificing the character's skills. In The Mummy Returns, she is an experienced explorer and adept fighter thanks to training from husband Rick O'Connell and memories of a past life in ancient Egypt. Okay, so what about the third movie? I wanted to like this as much as I liked the first two, but it is evident that this is the weakest of the three. Let's be clear, Michelle Yeoh is great. Maria Bello was recast as Evie due to Rachel Weisz having issues with the script and having a baby. Alex is now an adult and still an idiot. However, this is supposed to take place during the Chinese Civil War, so how is anyone white in this country right now? And no Oded Fair, so that's immediately 0 out of 10. The writing is pretty bad, and let's call attention to the fact that Rick doesn't believe in Yeti or a magic dagger, but is fine with a magic book and mummies.
Sure, Jan.
That's not to say there aren't good things. This scene in particular has some hilarious meaning.
Armory?
Have you ever seen a Walther P-38?
It's pretty anemic compared to the Peacekeeper.
Well, it's not a bad size, Dad. It's a bad stamina.
Rick sacrifices himself to save Alex, which is a god-tier dad move. And let's be honest, if the writing wasn't so bad, this would be the logical progression of the trilogy. Rick versus Imhotep, then the Scorpion King's army versus the Magi, and finally, Undead Army versus Undead Army. But what happened with this one? In How the Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor Killed the Franchise, Jeffrey Bowie Jr. explains, "Sorry, but releasing one vengeful mummy is enough. There wasn't much difference between Tomb of the Dragon Emperor and the first 2 installments. Someone releases a mummy, the crazed monster wreaks havoc, the heroes almost die, but don't, and successfully capture and or kill said mummy. As cool as it was to see Jet Li represent the mummy this time, there really wasn't anything special about him in Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. The story wasn't an exact carbon copy of the previous installments, but the beats were pretty much the same. Despite a 10-year layoff, The Mummy 3 felt like a rush job. The CGI was mostly shoddy, though not as bad as The Rock's Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns. The story was too simple, and not in a compelling way, and the movie fails to connect on a level that the previous 2 did. The Mummy and The Mummy Returns are far from perfect movies. However, those were fun action flicks that had great characters, solid storytelling with great effects. Except for The Scorpion King. What makes this trilogy great and amazing and forgiving of the 3rd installment? Louis Staples wrote an actual article called The Mummy Returns is Gay Actually, which, duh, but they do have a point. The most obvious factor, firstly, is thirst. Brendan Fraser, then at the peak of his bimbo acting career, stars as Rick O'Connell, a sort of trigger-happy, arrogant but caring, adventurous but domesticated father figure and husband. It's not difficult to see why queer men might be very responsive to the image of a sweaty and windswept Brendan, with his oh-so-chiseled jaw endangering, then saving his son and wife from near-death experiences. It also makes sense that this affection might have grown over time, given social media was recently flooded with praise for Brendan, who fell away from acting not long after The Mummy Returns release. He's been hailed as a great unifier of the modern internet, and fans have been calling for a renaissance. Although I love that they said for viewers who are more into baddies than daddies in the article when talking about Imhotep, it isn't just a guilty pleasure. It's a hot guilty pleasure, and I don't care who knows how good this is. I just want to point out for the record that I key smashed part of this script because I had no idea how to be coherent in my thoughts, because this is a good trilogy, and if you don't think so, you can fight me in the comments that I won't be reading.